and welcome Sophia to teach us Torah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So we're going to look at this week's parashat, which is chayyei Sarah. And the parasha begins with Sarah's death, and then Abraham buries her. And then we're going to look at what happens immediately after the burial, which is kind of a stark shift to the fate of Abraham and Sarah's child, Isaac. So Abraham, immediately after the burial is portrayed, the text says the following. Avraham zaken ba b'yamim, v'Hashem beirach et Avraham bakol. V'yomer Avraham el avdo, zaken beito, hamoshel bechol asher lo, simna yadecha tachat yerchi, v'ashbiecha v'Hashem Elokai hashamayim v'Elokai haaretz, asher lo tikach isha livni mibnot haknaani, asher anochi yoshev bekirbo. Ki el artzi ve'el moladati telech velakachta isha livni leyitzchak. So Avraham asks his servant, who actually isn't named here, but we seem to know Avraham's servant as Eliezer, to go and find a wife for Isaac, but not from the daughters of the Canaanites, but from the daughters of the women of the land where Abraham is from. So this immediate pressing concern of Abraham's to find a wife for his son is what we're going to be looking at today. And what's really interesting to me is that Isaac himself does not appear in the parasha until a wife has been found, agreed to marry him, and brought back for him. And this to me seems to go against what we think of as the gender roles in the Tanakh. We see lots of conversation about the woman's consent, and we see Abraham very fixated on finding a wife for his son, but we never see Isaac be consulted or consent to marriage or have any say in the matter, whether he gets married, to whom he gets married, from where this woman comes, any of these things. So we're going to start by looking at a couple of Mefarshim to notice that this is the case, and then I will make a suggestion as to why this is the case, with this a part of one comment, and then kind of leave it to you to maybe draw your own conclusions. So like we just read, Avraham brings his servant, says, make a vow, go find a wife for my son. And Eliezer responds, Ulai lo toveh ha'isha lalechet acharai el ha'aretz hazot, ha'hashev ashiv et bincha el ha'aretz asher yatzata misham. Eliezer says, what if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? So this seems like a pretty logistical question. If I go find a woman and she's like, yes, I'll marry him, but I'm not leaving, then what? But Sforno comments on the last few words, El ha'aretz asher yatzata misham, from the land from which you came. And Sforno actually says that this means a place which you had despised, that you hated this place. And Sforno says, Shema asta et hamakom. V'hina im ashba lakachat isha misham lo tachpotzi lavo hina esh abed et bincha lishar kasot ve'oneh ve'yit chayav lalechet sham ve'im lo yelech yibgod ve'eshet ne'orav. So if I make this oath to you, if I swear to you to take a wife from there, and then the woman I choose refuses to come here, then I've betrothed your son to this woman. Your son is now obligated to fulfill conjugal duties and to live with her as husband and wife. But if she won't come back here, and you won't allow him to go there, then you're setting your son up to be guilty of betraying his bride. Should I really bring him back there? So the Sforno is wondering, kind of what the geographical logistics are. But the piece that I'm most interested in is this whole conversation about Isaac's obligations, where Isaac is located, what his future wife wants and agrees to or won't agree to, what she'll consent to. And Isaac is completely, again, left out of this conversation. So Sforno seems to be asking why the Torah needs to specify that the land is from where Avraham left, if Avraham just made that clear. And the answer seems to be to emphasize Avraham's distaste for the land and what might happen if this woman refuses to leave the land. So then in response to that, Avraham says, Ve'im lo toveh ha'isha lelecha acharecha, ve'nikita mishvuati zot rak et bini lo tashev shama. If the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me, but do not take my son back there. So Avraham says, fine, if a woman won't come back with me, so be it, but Yitzchak is not going there. Do not take my son there. So Rashi then comments on this verse, on the phrase, so free from you'll be free of my oath. And Rashi says, Bakach lo isha mi benot aner mi eshkol mamre. So Rashi says, this doesn't actually mean you don't need to find my son a wife. It means that you're free of the oath to go back to my place. You should take a wife for him from the daughters of Aner or Eshkol or Mamre. So a different pool of women. But again, this is two men arranging this marriage for a third man, to which a woman has to agree, which there's no bearing on how Isaac feels about this. It's also worth noting, at the beginning of the parasha, it specifies how old Sarah was when she died. The calculations work out that Isaac is 27 or 28 years old. He's not like a little boy who they're betrothing before he's of age. He's a full-grown man, and he's never brought up. Okay, so I feel comfortable that it's established that Isaac is not consulted, and I want to look for just a minute before I wrap up as why that might be. So Avraham's servant goes all the way to Avraham's hometown, encounters Rebecca. While she is providing water for his camels, the servant watches her, and the text says, "V'ha'ish mishta'eh la mecharish lada'at hahitzlicha Hashem darko imlo." The man, Eliezer, meanwhile, stood gazing at her, silently wondering whether God had made his errand successful or not. So, what's really interesting to me is the phrase "hahitzlicha Hashem," whether God had made this successful. Sforno actually makes a comment on these words, explaining that if Rebecca was acting out of complete kindness, does not request payment, then the servant will know that God has orchestrated a sign that declares this woman to be the right one for Isaac. And this also, I think, can be perhaps extended to the question of Isaac's seeming lack of agency. I want to suggest that perhaps the story is set up to illustrate God's control over this whole situation. If God finds the right woman and has her behave in this way so that there's a sign for Eliezer to bring her back to Isaac, that the right woman will consent to go back. That this isn't just about Isaac's lack of agency, but perhaps everyone's lack of agency, that this is emblematic of all people. God is in charge, we are not. And this doesn't necessarily fit our modern sensibility of freedom of will and our own human choice, but I think it does really represent the ancient narrative unfolding of divine intervention. So that's my suggestion as to the why. And I think that perhaps this can be really jarring and uncomfortable, but it also might be in some ways comforting, that we can control up to a certain point. And then there are some things that even as competent adults, as Isaac was in his late 20s and a man and had everything available to him, he really did not have control over everything. And the same might be said about us, that even though we want to think that we have control over everything, maybe we don't. So it might be that this is offering us a suggestion that what we can do sometimes is leave the future up to fate, destiny, God, whatever we might want to think about. So that's my suggestion as to the why. And I definitely would leave it open if other people come to a different conclusion as to the why. Thank you.
Comments? And one thing I want to point out that Sophia very kindly did is she put on the discussion board, as it actually says in the syllabus, a brief summary of what she wanted to teach in her devar Torah. And that means that you have a place right on our discussion board where you can comment and reply. And then Sophia has the opportunity to see what you say there. Now I'm going to stop the recording in order to make sure that I don't inhibit anyone from commenting as they please, okay?